Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Reading Rainbows, where we're reading Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. And today we are reading chapter 27, A Good Place to Stay. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. Rudyard Kipling, The Elephant's Child. They did not set off to join Eleanor after Dustfinger had left them. "Meggie, I know I said we would," said Mo, as they stood in the square in front of the war memorial, feeling rather at a loss. "But I'd like to leave the journey until tomorrow. As I told you before, there's something else I have to discuss with Finoglio." The old man was still standing where he had been when he spoke to Dustfinger, staring down the road. His grandchildren were pulling at him and talking to him, but he didn't seem to notice them. "What exactly do you want to discuss with him?" Mo sat on the steps in front of the memorial and made Meggie sit down beside him. "Do you see those names?" he asked, pointing up at the chiseled letters listing people no longer alive. "There's a family behind every name. A mother or father, brothers and sisters, perhaps a wife. If one of them were to find out that letters can be brought to life, that someone who's only a name now could become flesh and blood again, don't you think he or she would do anything at all, to make it happen?" Meggie looked at the long list. Someone had painted a heart next to the name at the top. There was a bunch of dried flowers on the stone steps in front of the memorial. "No one can bring back the dead, Meggie," Mo went on. "Perhaps it's true that death is only the beginning of a new story, but no one has ever read the book in which it's written, and the writer of that book certainly doesn't live in a little village on the coast playing football with his grandchildren. Your mother's name isn't on a stone like this, but hidden somewhere in a book, and I have an idea that just might make it possible to alter what happened 9 years ago." "You're going back." "Well, that's what I would assume too, but that's not quite what it sounds like he's talking about." "No, I'm not. I gave you my word. Have I ever broken it?" Meggie shook her head. "You broke your word to Dustfinger," she thought, but she didn't say so out loud. But breaking your word to someone else isn't quite the same as breaking your word to your child. I'm just pointing that out. "There you are then," said Mo. "I want to talk to Finoglio. That's the only reason why I want to stay." Meggie looked at the sea. The sun had broken through the clouds, and all of a sudden the water was glistening and shining as if someone had poured paint into it. "It's not far from here," she murmured. "What isn't?" "Capricorn's village." Mo looked eastward. "Yes, it's odd that he felt drawn here, of all places, don't you think? As if he were looking for somewhere resembling the countryside of his own story." "Suppose he finds us?" "Nonsense. Do you know how many villages there are along this coast?" Meggie shrugged her shoulders. "He found you before, even when you were far, far away." "Oh, excuse me." "He found me with Dustfinger's help, and you can be sure Dustfinger isn't going to help him again." Mo rose and drew Meggie to her feet. "Come on, let's ask Finoglio where we can stay the night. He looks like he can use some company." Finoglio did not tell them whether Dustfinger looked like he had imagined him. He said very little as they walked back to his house, but when Mo told him that he and Meggie would like to stay there another day, his face brightened slightly. He even offered them a place to spend the night, an apartment he sometimes rented out to tourists. Mo gratefully accepted. So the guy just happens to have an apartment he rents out? Okay. And, it's kind of interesting that, he brightens up a little with the prospect of them staying another night. As much as he tries to act gruff and harsh and all, it's obvious that he likes having company and people to talk to, and he's fascinated by Mo. He and the old man talked far into the evening, while Finoglio's grandchildren chased Meggie all over the nooks and crannies of the house. The two men sat in Finoglio's study. It was next to the kitchen, and Meggie kept trying to listen at the closed door, but Pippo and Rico always caught her in the act and dragged her away to the next flight of stairs before she'd heard more than a few words. Finally she gave up. She let Paula show her the kittens scampering around with their mother in the tiny garden behind the house, and followed the three children to the house where they lived with their parents. They didn't stay long, just long enough to persuade their mother to let them stay at their grandfather's for supper. Supper was pasta with sage. Pippo and Rico picked the bitter-tasting green bits out of their sauce with disgusted expressions on their faces, but Meggie and Paula enjoyed the flavor of leaves. After the meal, Mo and Finoglio drank a whole bottle of red wine between them. When the old man finally saw Mo and Meggie to the door, he said good night and added, "So you'll look at my books as we agreed, Mortimer, and I'll get down to work first thing tomorrow." "What kind of work, Mo?" asked Meggie as they walked along the dimly lit alleys together. Night had hardly cooled the air at all. A strangely foreign wind blew through the village, hot and sandy, as if it were carrying the desert itself across the sea. "I'd rather you didn't ask me that," said Mo. "Let's just act as if we were on holiday for a few days. This looks like a good place for a holiday, don't you think?" Meggie answered only with a nod. Mo really knew her very well. He could often tell what she was thinking before she put it into words, but he sometimes forgot she wasn't 5 years old anymore. These days it took more than a few kind words to distract her from her worries. "Very well," she thought, as she silently followed Mo through the sleeping village. "If he doesn't want to tell me what Finoglio's supposed to do for him, I'll ask old Turtleface himself." "Oh, that's real polite of you, Meggie, old Turtleface. And if he won't say either, then one of his grandchildren can find out for me." Paula was just the right size for a spy. It didn't seem all that long ago since Meggie herself had been able to hide unnoticed under a table. And Chapter 28, Going Home. My library was dukedom large enough. William Shakespeare, The Tempest. It was almost midnight by the time Eleanor finally saw her garden gate beside the road. The lights down by the banks of the lake stood side by side like a caravan of glowworms, trembling as they were reflected in the black water. It was good to be home again. Even the wind that blew on Eleanor's face as she got out to open the gate felt familiar. It was all familiar, the scent of the hedges and the earth and the air, so much cooler and moister than in the south. Didn't taste of salt anymore either. I might even miss that saltiness, thought Eleanor. The sea always filled her with longing, though for what she was never sure. I think that that's a common thing among people, that, the sea, being like down by the ocean and all fills you with a longing, and I don't know, maybe it's just, a longing to explore, to see more of the world. So much of the world is separated by water, whether it's, oceans or lakes or rivers. And sure, you can cross, over or around a lake easy enough, cross over a river easy enough, but to cross over an ocean is an exciting journey, and that longing that comes from being near it is a longing to see, what's out there, not just across the ocean, but on it, in it, under it. The iron gate creaked quietly as she pushed it open, almost as if it were welcoming her home, but no other voice would greet her. "What a silly notion, Eleanor," she muttered as she got back into the car. "Your books will welcome you home. That's good enough, surely." She had been in a strange mood even during the drive. She had taken her time on the way home, avoiding major roads, and had spent the night in a tiny place in the mountains, the name of which she had already forgotten. She had enjoyed being alone again, for that, after all, was what she was used to. Yet the silence in her car had suddenly begun to trouble her, and she had gone into a cafe in a sleepy little town that didn't even have a bookshop, just to hear other human voices. Well, now, that's really unusual for Eleanor. Stopping off in a town that doesn't even have a bookshop? Stopping for coffee? Yeah, pretty sure that she said at one time that she doesn't drink coffee or something. I don't know. She hadn't spent much time there, staying only long enough to gulp down a cup of coffee because she was annoyed with herself. "What's all this about, Eleanor?" she had muttered when she was back in the car. "Since when did you long for human company? High time you were home again before you go right around the bend." Her house looked so dark and deserted as she drove up to it that it seemed curiously strange to her. Only the sense of her garden made her feel a little better as she went up the steps to the front door. The light over the door, which usually came on automatically at night, wasn't working, and it took Eleanor a ridiculous amount of time to get her key into the lock. There's something about this that doesn't seem right. Not just that light that should come on automatically isn't working, but also just like that sense of something being not right that she feels. That it seemed curiously strange, as the book says. That's her gut telling her that something's wrong. As she pushed open the door and stumbled into the pitch-dark hall, she quietly cursed the man who usually kept an eye on the house and garden whenever she was away. She had tried phoning him 3 times before she set out, but she supposed he'd gone to see his daughter again. Didn't anyone realize what treasures this house contained? Of course, if they'd been made of gold, but they consisted only of paper and printer's ink. It was very quiet, and for a moment Eleanor thought she heard Mortimer's voice as it brought life into the church with the red walls. She could have listened to him for 100 years. No, 200 at least. "I must get him to read aloud to me when he arrives," she murmured, taking the shoes off her tired feet. "There must be some books he can read safely." Why had she never before noticed how quiet her house could be? It was silent as the grave, and the pleasure Eleanor had expected to feel as soon as she was back within her own 4 walls was slow in coming. "Hello, here I am again," she cried into the silence as she felt along the wall for the light switch. "Now you shall all be dusted and tidied again, my dears." The ceiling light came on, very bright, and as Eleanor stumbled back in alarm, she fell over her own handbag, which she had put down on the floor. "Oh, heavens!" she whispered, getting to her feet again. "Oh, dear heavens! Oh, no!" The custom-made bookshelves were empty. The books that had stood on them so safely, spine beside spine, now lay in untidy heaps on the floor, crumpled, dirty, and trampled underfoot as if heavy boots had been performing a wild dance on them. Eleanor began to tremble all over. She stumbled through her desecrated treasures as if she were wading through a muddy pond, pushed them aside, picked one up and let it drop, staggered on down the long corridor that led to her library. The corridor was no better. Great, disorderly piles of books were heaped so high that Eleanor could hardly make her way through the ruins. At last she reached the library door. It had not been locked. Eleanor stood there for an eternity, weak at the knees, before she finally dared to open it. Her library was empty. Not a book in sight, not a single book, not on the shelves or beneath the broken glass on the display cases. There wasn't a book on the floor either. They were all gone. Instead, a red rooster dangled from the ceiling, stone dead. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. The rooster's head was hanging down. Its red comb flopped over its staring eyes. Its plumage was still glossy, as if all the life in it had fled there into the fine russet breast feathers, the darkly patterned wings, and the long, deep green tail feathers that shimmered like silk. One of the windows was open. A black arrow had been drawn in soot on the white paint of the windowsill, and pointed the way to the garden outside. Eleanor staggered toward the window, numb with fear. The night was not dark enough to hide what lay on the lawn outside. A shapeless mound of ashes, pale gray in the moonlight, gray as moth wings, gray as burnt paper. There they were, her most valuable books, or all that was left of them. Eleanor knelt down on the floorboards, on the wood she had so carefully chosen. The wind wafted in through the open window and over her, the familiar wind, and it smelled almost like the air in Capricorn's church. Eleanor wanted to scream, she wanted to curse, rage, cry out in fury, but not a sound came out of her mouth. All she could do was weep. Wow. So they managed to break into her house. I mean, in a way, I kind of wonder if the guy that's supposed to, be looking after her house and garden, if they did something to him. So they managed to break into her house, destroyed all the books, in that front room, all the books down the corridor, and they got into the library, and they just took all those books, all her most precious, valuable books, and, monetary-wise, you don't realize just how much a rare book can go for. This was literally a fortune in paper. They took all that outside and burnt it. That's just wow. So that's the end of that chapter. I thank you for joining me. I really hope you enjoyed today's chapters, and I hope you join me next time.